How's it going, everyone? Now I know it's been a minute since I posted a video, but I got an amazing recipe for you here today for some awesome kick-ass cinnamon buns. Now I've spent a long time perfecting this recipe to make sure we get the ultimate in soft cinnamon buns. So to start off, we're going to get our yeast a little bit of a head start by putting it in some room temperature milk, as well as mixing in a tiny bit of sugar, just to give our guys a little bit of a boost. Now not only is this going to act as a bit of a boost, but it's also going to let us know that our yeast is still alive, because let's be honest, if you're using that yeast that you find in the back of your cupboard, it might be dead. But that's just life sometimes, so we gotta move on. And moving on to our dry ingredients, now I'm gonna add the rest of our sugar and flour, as well as a bit of salt. And you'll notice that I'm not making the dough super sweet, and the reason I'm doing that is because I want our filling to be where a majority of the sweetness comes from. And as you see there, I just added in our yeast as well as some of our eggs. And by eggs, I really mean 1 whole egg and 2 egg yolks. The reason for that is because while I want these guys to be nice and fluffy, I want them to be a little thick too. And speaking of getting them nice and thick, I'm going to add in a ton of butter. This is almost going to resemble a brioche type of dough, but it will come together fairly easily. And of course, as always, the exact recipe is going to be written down in the description below. And of course, I'm going to be using weight measurements, not volume measurements, because if you want your recipe to come out as good as mine while we're baking, we need to be exact. And just as our dough starts to come together, I'm going to start kneading it. And to do that, I'm just going to put a little bit of flour on the surface. You don't need a ton. This is a pretty easy dough to get right, and it's fairly easy to work with, so you're not going to need a ton of flour. And just be cautious, because the more flour you add in, the denser it's going to turn out, and that's just no good. And you're going to know when to stop kneading by the outside. The outside should be nice and smooth, no tears or rips. It should take you about 10-15 minutes of kneading, depending on how absolutely yoked you are. But now that our dough boy is nice and smooth, we're going to cover it up and put it in the fridge and let it rise overnight. And now, while this is the best way to do it that I've found, you could also just make it the morning of. Just be aware you got to leave it off to the side for about 30 to 45 minutes, so that way it has time to rise. Either way, we're moving on to the sweetest part of this recipe. That's right, the filling. And you're going to notice right off the bat, I'm doing something definitely non-traditional. I'm actually using Mascarpone cheese as part of the filling, and that's because I don't want to just use butter, because I found that when you just use butter, you can sometimes end up with these large crevasses of just cinnamon and dark brown sugar. But I want to actually be biting into something that's a little bit more substantial, that you're actually going to have a nice little creamy layer, and that's why I'm using the Mascarpone cheese, which, by the way, you definitely want to leave out so that way it gets up to room temperature before trying to mix it. Otherwise, well, good luck. And now after that's done, we're just going to cover it up and put it off to the side, or in the fridge if you're doing this the night before, because another little filling idea that I came up with is adding in some nuts. Now here I'm using walnuts because that's what I had on hand, but I do actually prefer using pecans. Either way, this will come out amazing. So I am just going to put them in the oven real quick to toast them up. But now that we're moving on to the next morning, I'm going to take my dough ball out, give it a nice little beat down just to deflate it, you know, assert your dominance, take your worldly angers out on it, because now that it has risen nicely, it is time to assemble these cinnamon bun boys. And one thing to keep in mind while rolling this out is you want to be nice and gentle with it. You don't want to beat it up too much, otherwise it'll stiffen up. And again, don't use too much flour, because that's how you make it super dense. You know, really treat it kindly now. You've already asserted your dominance, it knows its place. So just take your time and gently roll it out. And if you're rolling it out directly from the fridge, you'll notice that it'll start to shrink back every single time you roll it. If it does that, just take a break, let it warm up a little bit. That's the gluten doing what it's made to do. And as you can see, what I did right there is, as you're rolling it out, you're building in a lot of tension into the dough. Again, you want to release that by just lifting it up. Sometimes I'll actually flip the entire dough sheet over just to make sure it's not going to be sticking. But now we're on to my favorite part, which is actually adding in the filling. Now, a good tip is just to let the filling warm up a little bit. That way you can easily smooth it out. And now I did roll my dough out to about 1/3 of an inch, which is kind of thin, but I do enjoy having more layers. But if you want to prioritize having fewer layers yet that have more of the filling inside, then just roll it out a little bit less. And I did not forget about our toasted chopped walnuts, which I did just sprinkle on, and I will save some off to the side to throw some on top as a bit of a garnish. And now we're going to start rolling it up, and you don't want to do it super tight, but you don't want to leave it too loose either. It's something that you're just going to have to play around with. And now that we have our cinnamon bun log all put together, we're going to butter up our 9 by 16 inch pan very liberally, because not only is this going to prevent that nice caramel layer that's formed when the sugars start to melt out of these cinnamon buns from sticking, making for an absolute horrible cleanup situation, but by adding in a ton of butter, you're going to get a bit of a frying effect too as that butter melts, which is always a good thing. And a bit of a pro level move here is I'm going to put any excess filling that I've had right into the bottom of the pan, so that way this will turn into some awesome caramel sauce as it melts and caramelizes. Kind of making almost like a monkey bread type of situation. But you don't have to be perfect, just get it in there, because either way it'll come out tasting amazing. Now on to cutting up our cinnamon bun log into our individual cinnamon buns. Now if you look at other recipes online, there's tons of different little tips and tricks to how to best cut it up. Here I just have, dropped it. But here I just have my sharpest serrated knife in my kitchen, which I'm going to use to cut it up. Like I said, there's other different tips and tricks that people use. Sometimes they'll use fishing line or some other type of really thin wire. But whatever way you decide to slice it up, you should get yourself 12 evenly sized cinnamon buns, which we're going to cover and let rest off to the side to proof and rise a little bit, so that way it's ultra fluffy, which should take around 30 to 45 minutes depending on what the temperature in your kitchen is like. And we're also going to start preheating our oven to 375. And while our cinnamon buns are resting, proofing, and our oven is preheating, I'm going to make our cream cheese icing here. Because it's not a cinnamon bun unless you have a nice layer of icing thrown on top of it, just to add to the sweetness. And I'm also going to throw in some mascarpone cheese that I had left over as well, because why not? Otherwise, this is a pretty simple, easy cream cheese icing. Of course, all the ingredients and amounts are going to be written down in the description below, as well as the method. But this is definitely something you kind of just have to fuss around with and play around with. If you make it a little too thick, add in a bit of heavy cream or milk, just to thin it out a bit. You don't want it super thick, but you also don't want it way too thin. But as you can see here, I'm kind of struggling to get the right consistency, so I'm going to be switching back and forth. Heavy cream, sugar, heavy cream, heavy sugar. But I promise you, I will get there. And just as a little bit of a pro tip here, if you're doing this in the winter and your kitchen is running a little bit on the cooler side and it's taking forever for your cinnamon buns to proof and you want to kind of speed it up a little bit, what you can do is you can just stick it on top of your oven, get that little extra ambient heat to make sure they rise and proof a little bit quicker. And once they've puffed up to about a third of their original size, into the oven they go for about 15 to 20 minutes or until they're nicely golden brown. And right as you take them out of the oven, you want to smother them in that awesome cream cheese icing that we made, just so it melts down into all of the little crevices that might have formed. And we're going to garnish the top again with some of those roasted walnuts that I saved from before. And now this is something that you definitely want to serve immediately while it's still warm, because it'll be at its peak softness and its tastiest. And now just look at that nicely golden brown corner right there. Oh, the corner pieces are always my favorite pieces. And now I would be lying to you guys if I didn't tell you that these were the absolute softest, fluffiest, and creamiest cinnamon buns that I have ever had. They're just amazing. You guys seriously got to try this one. I mean, really, do not sleep on this recipe. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I know it's been a long time between my last few uploads, but because of the end of the semester coming up, things have been a little bit more stressful. Either way, I plan on getting you guys a lot more awesome content, so be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on my Instagram page, Dave's Creative Kitchen, as well as my Facebook page, where you guys can see some behind the scenes as to how I actually develop these recipes and make them. Anyway, thanks again. Peace.